So here I am to do my April reviews, my wrap-up video of the month. So it's the April wrap-up, yes. I read 3 books. This was not my best reading month, admittedly, but it was a reading month. Nevertheless, I did read in it. If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Italo Calvino. I don't know where to start with this book because it is bananas. The shit is bananas. David Swanson, who is a subscriber, he described it aptly as banana pants, and that's 1000% true. It is a wild ride of a book, and it's a very different novel. So, like, warning, I'm gonna put a warning here. I don't think that this is like everyone's taste. I think it's going to be not really, it's definitely divisive. A lot of people are not going to enjoy it, but I personally was very into it. I really enjoyed it. I could feel my brain stretching as I was reading this book. Some of the ideas that he writes about in the novel are very out there, wacky, mind-bending ideas, but reading it and understanding it is kind of what makes you feel like you're stretching your ability to think a little bit. And so that was a very rewarding experience in that sense. It's difficult to summarize this novel in a concise and efficient way, but essentially the plot, a protagonist who goes to the bookstore and purchases a new copy, or in the beginning you're reading the copy of If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Italo Calvino. And a couple pages in, basically he finds that this copy is defective and the book doesn't continue, and he needs to go and return it to the bookshop and figure out what happened to the rest of the manuscript. And as he's there, he meets this other woman who encountered the same problem. Her name is Ludmilla. And the two of them, throughout the rest of the book, essentially try to find the missing manuscript to Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. However, in the interim, they find copies to other novels that are kind of obscure and these very erudite books that no one's heard of. Find that they run into that same issue again and again, and it happens, I think it's 12 times over, where the manuscript is not finished and they have to find the rest of it. They go on this cat and mouse chase of sorts, trying to find the end of the story. Okay. As the reader, you are also reading these manuscripts that they pick up along the way, and they kind of do read short stories, basically. Each one is different, and you only get a couple pages of a short story before the chapter or that story ends. Each one of those stories is so engrossing and captivating and absurd that you yourself as the reader are I wanted to read the rest of that. Why can't I read the rest of that? But it cuts off because obviously you return back to the main narrative, which is the two of them trying to find the rest of the story. In that sense, it's very much a frame novel, stories within stories within stories, but there is a humor that Calvino captures in this book that is laugh out loud funny. The absurdity and the ridiculousness and the irony that he is able to capture in this book is no small feat. And just to give you a sense of the kind of humor I'm talking about, and this isn't a spoiler because there are so many running jokes like this that I don't think it really ruins anything, but it's just to give you some sense of what the humor is like. Ludmilla, who is the woman romantic interest of the novel. So it kind of ends up being the case that, while the two of them, or rather the protagonist, is looking for the remaining manuscript, he is also at the same time pursuing this woman who is another avid reader, that they share this common goal of looking to complete this book. There's a lot in this book about writing and reading and the act of reading and being able to be an appreciative and good reader, and how that impacts your ability to write if you're also a writer. So he's really ruminating on the act and process of reading and writing in this book, along with a number of other themes, but that's certainly a theme and a topic, is the act of reading, the love of reading, what reading provides, and similarly the role of the author and what the author ought to provide to a reader. If I can compare it to something, I would almost say Milkman by Anna Burns, but I don't know if that's the best comparison. So if anyone has read this and maybe can compare it to another novel, let me know. The other one I'm thinking that it kind of reminded me of is The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. I don't know why. Probably the setting, maybe. I'm not sure, but there's something kind of about both novels that reminded me of each other. So anyway, there is a character in this book who is friends with Ludmilla, who is the love interest, and this character is like an acquaintance. This character is an acquaintance of Ludmilla's, and he is a non-reader, and so the protagonist refers to him as non-reader, which I think is what reminded me of Milkman by Anna Burns, because she has these epithets for everyone. This non-reader, one time in the novel, appears at Ludmilla's house and is looking through her bookshelf, and the protagonist is asking him why he's looking through her bookshelf if he's not a reader and has no interest in reading any of the books. And he responds saying that he is a sculptor or an artist of sorts, and he uses these books, her books namely, to create his art. And so later in the novel, the protagonist is looking for a specific book on her bookshelf, and he comes to find it later at like a gallery or an art event installation of some sort, and sees the book in one of his sculptures, and it's just like hilarious. But yeah, like it's that kind of irony, I guess, if that helps at all. I don't know if that's an instructive example, but for me, like that type of joke just kind of kept running throughout the book. Part of me thinks that he is pranking us with this book, but at the same time he's not, because there's a lot in this that's like very meaty and solid and really fascinating ideas. This is an author who sat to write about a book that doesn't end and that is defective, basically had us read a book that does not end. So I don't know, like I kind of wonder if it's a joke in and of itself. Like there's so much I would ask Italo Calvino. He's obviously a philosopher of sorts and just a great thinker, but this book I really do recommend because of how unique it is, because of how different the experience of reading this really is. At this point in my reading life, I do really enjoy reading something where I felt like, wow, I have not read that before, because sometimes a lot of books can start to kind of lose their shape and their form in your mind, because, you know, as you read more and more, they kind of can blend together and whatnot. So reading something that is so unique and so different is really enjoyable for me, because it's just like I haven't read something like this before. And because of that, I do highly recommend this book. It is, I think, somewhat of a contemporary classic, and I completely see why, and I think the hype is deserved, and that's it. I think the hype is deserved. The hype is deserved for this book. It is truly, truly a mesmerizing novel. To get into the flow of the writing and the story, it's totally mesmerizing, totally captivating, and he is a beautiful writer. So yeah, I really, truly enjoyed this. I think it's probably one of my favorite books I've read this year so far. And I picked up another book by Calvino, which is called Invisible Cities. I don't know if anyone has read that, but my question is if you have, is it just about like cities? Like, is that, because I started the book and it seems like maybe that, I don't know, I'm not sure about that one, so ugh. But anyway, I do recommend this book. I think it's, like I said, not gonna be to everyone's taste, but if what I've said so far intrigues you, something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, a little bit, you know, out of the box type of thinking, and if you're into like absurd humor and that kind of postmodern vibe, which admittedly I'm not always a fan, but I really was into this. And if you like David Mitchell, he likes this book a lot because he has there's a blurb about something he wrote on the back. I was magnetized. From the opening lines of this eccentric book, I was magnetized. I wouldn't want a word of If on a Winter's Night a Traveler to be different. It's an experience. It's an experience. Do it. Let me know what you think. I liked it. Go for it. Give it a shot. It's a coffee break. Yeah, reviewing books, very hard work, you know? So the second book I read in April is Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. This book was published in 1980, I believe. It's her first novel, so before Gilead, which I feel like has recently blown up on BookTube for good reason. Love that book. Housekeeping follows Ruth and her sister Lucille in a small town. They're growing up in a small town in Idaho. Their grandmother is looking after them, and then shortly thereafter, when their grandmother passes away, their Aunt Sylvie comes to move into their house and look after them. Marilynne Robinson, in my view, is a master of mood and atmosphere, and I think how she accomplishes that specifically in Housekeeping is this family's history, which is riddled with clearly lots of mental health problems, sort of a very strange and tumultuous past, with the grandfather having been killed in a train accident, I believe, and their mother, like Ruth and Lucille's mother, had committed suicide by driving herself off a cliff into a river or a lake or something. So there's kind of a looming, almost haunting vibe in the book because we know that history, but we don't know it intimately. We don't know her reasons for committing suicide. We don't know, you know, a lot of the other details of their family history, except for some of these more climactic events. Once Sylvie moves in, she is an oddball, kind of right off the bat. She is very lost in her thoughts almost perpetually and distracted. She's always distracted in her own head and kind of unable to be an appropriate caregiver to these two girls. Ruth ends up kind of having to stay a little bit more attached to Sylvie because she's younger and she's not as independent, and she's a little bit more diffident in her disposition. I will say for me, this was a slower read. I did think it was at times a bit boring, but it's Marilynne Robinson, and like it's still, you still feel like you're reading something meaningful and important with Marilynne Robinson, I think, whatever it is that she's writing. But for me, I really preferred Gilead to Housekeeping. Housekeeping was just, it was slow for me. I wasn't always interested in picking up the book because it was a slow burn. Like, plot aside, just, you know, the mood and the pacing of the book is slow. The atmosphere is creepy, it's eerie, and like I said, very well established, but it's a quiet book and it's a slow book, but the characters are interesting and they are complex and there's a lot of depth to them, and so I think it's like worthwhile reading, and I believe these characters are, you know, expounded upon later on in other novels by Marilynne Robinson. Like, I haven't read Home yet, but I'm looking to do that soon, because she definitely gets you intrigued into the characters. Like, you do, specifically, I would say the mother, like, I'm curious to know more about her mentality and her mindset and what drove her to do what she did. And besides that, I'm also curious to learn more about Sylvie's character. There's also definitely a theme running through the book of transience and the impermanence of things, because Sylvie is kind of a nomadic character almost. She kind of travels around and doesn't really stay put in one place for very long. You kind of get that sense that she's this ephemeral type of character, you know, very distant and evasive. And I'm curious, like, to know more of her backstory. So the sense of character development and intrigue is very present in the book, but it's a slower book. It's a slow burn. So if you're in the mood for that, go for it. And then the last book I read in April is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I have this copy by Modern Classics, but I'm so happy I finally read this. Like, I've been meaning to read this for so long, so I feel a sense of accomplishment with finally having read this book, and I'm very happy that I have. It's a beautiful story. It's kind of like, it's a feminist novel, I really think, when it comes down to it. Yeah, so this was published in 1937, and it follows Janie Stark, who is fierce. She is a formidable female protagonist, and it's basically like a coming of age story for an adult, and that is kind of rare. We don't see that as much with characters in novels that are older. You know, typically you see this with YA novels, but certainly this is most definitely a coming of age novel for a woman who goes through the trials and tribulations of several relationships, finally to end up with one that she feels valued in, and she truly loves her partner and is able to kind of reclaim her independence as a woman when she's with someone who embraces her womanhood and her independence. In the beginning of the book, Janie is speaking with her grandmother, and her grandmother's dying wish for her is that she ends up with a man that is able to care for her financially, where Janie can kind of sit and not have to work all day as she had done. Janie goes off and marries a man initially who did require her to do a lot of hard labor and work, and she wasn't into it, and she wasn't into the relationship. And so afterwards she meets Jodie Stark, who allows her to live this very, you know, privileged lifestyle relative to what she had previously. And she finds that being in a sort of more elevated position in her society, and her husband in this part of the novel is basically he was elected to be like the mayor or governor or whatever you want to call it of the town, and she was sort of like the first lady almost. In position or state, she felt kind of separated from the rest of the people, and her husband wouldn't really let her participate in a lot of things that she wanted to. And so she was able to live out her grandmother's wishes for her and have a lifestyle where she could sit and not dirty her hands and so forth, but she wasn't happy in it. And so her final relationship is with Tea Cake, who, yes, that's his name, Tea Cake, who loves her and treats her with respect. And she is finally happy with him, although he is quite younger than she is, and there is some, you know, controversy or a lot of gossip about this. There's a lot of kind of quieter moments in the novel that I really cherished, like in the beginning of the book. I really love the beginning. Especially, I just want to give you a sense of, again, the writing. The first paragraph is poetry as far as I'm concerned. Like, it reads like poetry. Starts like this. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some they come in with the tide, for others they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation. His dreams mocked to death by time, that is the life of men. I love this first sentence. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. I see why this has stood the test of time. I think it being a feminist novel, specifically one for African American women, that really show, okay, here is a woman who is able to pave her own path and not be brought down by the men in her life or her community at large, and she's able to kind of hold her head up high at the end of the day and say that she has lived her life on her own terms. And I think that's beautiful, and I enjoyed it. So Yes, that's Their Eyes Were Watching God, which, by the way, I think is probably one of the best titles of a novel. It's just, it really, this title kind of, in my mind at least, is such an image. Like, I just imagine people who are so faithful looking up at God and thinking, what the fuck, dude? So yeah, that's Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I did really enjoy it. It's obviously a classic, so check it out if you haven't. So that's it. That's my review. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. As always, please leave a comment, subscribe, like the video, all that jazz, and I'll check you later. See ya.